Gene here. A quick note before we jump into today's show. Over the course of the last couple of weeks, Google has changed the way that it deals with podcasts, which now makes it so much easier for you if you are on an Android device to get access to podcasts without jumping through a bunch of hoops and doing a bunch of extra steps. If you go to tappingqa.com/Android, you'll see some easy to follow instructions. Or if you happen to be on your Android device right now, if you go to tappingqapodcast.com, click on the link that says Android device, it will show you how to subscribe right there on your phone, and you will never miss an episode moving forward. This is Gene Monterastelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 319, originally aired July 4th, 2018. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today, we're going to have a conversation about tapping for betrayal and why betrayal is such a unique problem for us to address. Before we do that, two quick announcements. First of all, remember that you can subscribe to our free 10-part guide in helping you to eliminate self-sabotage. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com, click on the big blue button, and every single day you will get another piece of this guide. We don't give it to you all at once, so you're not overwhelmed with information, but instead every single day in your inbox will be a useful piece of information that you can start using EFT in simple, small ways every day to eliminate self-sabotage, so you can start taking the choices and the actions that you want to take. If you happen to be listening to today's show in a web browser, up in the right-hand column, up at the top, you'll also see the blue button there. Click on that and subscribe. Also, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the podcast. It's super easy to do on Apple devices, on Android devices, on that home Alexa. If you like to listen to things on a smart speaker from your home, go to tappingqapodcast.com, and up at the top, there are multiple ways that you can subscribe to the show so you don't miss anything as we move forward. Today's conversation is with Dr. Debi Silber, and I was talking to Debi about the work that she was doing and what was going on behind it. And as she was sharing with me her work and how she ended up doing her work, we were working on something else. So I had to keep this thought in the back of my mind so at the end of our conversation I could bring this up. But I immediately, once we finished the task that was hand, invited her to be on the podcast. Debi has been doing some really interesting work around betrayal. She actually focused her PhD work on how people recover from betrayal and you can get to the other side of it. And betrayal is unique and different, as you will hear in this conversation, from other negative emotions. I can be mad about something, and that can be isolated to the experience that I'm mad within. When we feel betrayed, what it does is we're not just feeling betrayed in the moment, but you start to doubt your ability to trust. Because this one place that I really trusted got undermined. Does that mean I'm trusting poorly everywhere else? And so it starts to show up not just in that one specific relationship, but it starts showing up in lots of relationships. Not only does it show up in emotional ways, but it can show up in physical ways as well. And so over the course of this conversation, what we do is Debi shares her work, how she got involved with it, and what the healing arc looks like when we are dealing with betrayal. At the end of the interview, she talks about a really specific tool that you can use right away. After the interview, I'll give you some instructions on how you can get that tool absolutely free. So here is my conversation with Debi about betrayal. So for those who not know the term, what do you mean when you talk about post-betrayal transformation?
That's what was discovered. I just finished a PhD study, and it was on how women experience betrayal, what holds them back, what helps them heal. And originally I was studying something called post-traumatic growth, which is the growth that comes from trauma, where it's a new life, a new world that you never would have seen or experienced had that not happened. But since healing from betrayal is so different than healing from other types of trauma, which my study participants agreed on. I did too. It needed a new name. So I coined a new term, post-betrayal transformation. So what that really means is it's the healing that comes from trauma, but specifically the additional things you have to heal from when we're talking about betrayal.
So I am a big stickler of making sure that we're like using common vocabulary just so that we're communicating in a way that works really well for everyone. So obviously, because you were doing very specific research, you had to define your terms very specifically. How do you define in this context what you mean by betrayal?
It's the breaking of a spoken or unspoken rule by someone we trust. So the more we trusted and we're dependent upon someone, the bigger the betrayal.
Okay. And so that word rule is interesting. What do you mean by that?
You know, a rule is really, it's spoken or unspoken. It's just an agreement. It was, for example, a child and a parent agrees that the child will listen, the parent keeps them safe. When that rule is broken, it's a betrayal.
And so you said that betrayal had a number of unique characteristics and things that need to be worked through. What are those things that are unique from betrayal from some other type of bad thing that happens to us?
It's the healing of the self, because betrayal is intentional. You know, if someone passes away, we can still, we miss them, but we feel like, we love them, they loved us. That's not a question. When someone that we counted on, depended upon, intentionally does someone to hurt us, there's rejection, abandonment, worthiness, all of those aspects of self, confidence that all have to be rebuilt.
Okay, and you use the word intentional in there. So does betrayal have to involve intentionality, or is it that I simply perceive intentionality?
For it to be considered a betrayal, for that hurt to be there, there was an understanding. And when two people have that same understanding, and then one person, whether it's a family member, a friend, a partner, decides, yes, that's been the understanding, but I'm going to do something else anyway, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, so because I have certainly been in situations where I felt like that you and I had a spoken or an unspoken agreement, and I'm feeling as if you have not lived up to that, and that then becomes the story that I'm writing in my head. So so that is not what you're talking about here. It has to be initiated by the other person, either deliberately or indeliberately, like they're moving on away from that.
One is a misunderstanding or a miscommunication, and the other is we both had a very clear understanding of these rules, and then those rules were violated.
Okay, and so then how then do you figure out that we have fallen into this realm? Like when someone is doing some sort of self-assessment, or you're in a situation where you're training other clinicians to notice something like this, what are the telltale signs that something like this has happened?
Sure, there are many. There's this cascade of events that happens, and it's once there's that shock to the body and mind, there are physical, mental, and emotional consequences. And it can be typically physical issues could be adrenal fatigue, extreme fatigue, gut issues, very common, digestive issues, hormonal issues, weight changes. So that is physical. That's very common. Mentally, it could be brain fog, confusion. Emotionally, it could be rage, anger, sadness, depression, anxiety, overwhelm. So many.
So, and just from kind of a lay perspective, hearing you describe all of those symptoms, it almost sounds like because someone has had this trust violated, the world no longer feels safe, and basically they're just living in fight, flight, or freeze the entire time.
That's part of it. We also, during the study, it was discovered that there are these 5 very predictable stages from the moment of the experience to the moment we feel healed. And that's actually stage 2. And that is the breakdown of the body, mind, and worldview. And once we've received that shock, you're absolutely right. Everything we've believed in, counted on, held to be true no longer exists. So the body then goes into the stressed the stress response is ignited, and then all of that happens. But the part of the breakdown of the worldview is exactly that. We trusted the world to look a certain way based on how we conduct our relationships. It's what creates order, prevents chaos. And then it's all dismantled. The bottom has dropped.
So you mentioned that there are 5 stages that kind of go from being betrayed to the other end of the transformation. Could you just walk us through those at a high level, kind of what that process looks like?
Sure. The first is, if you imagine 4 legs of a table, it's very balanced. But what I found in the study was there was this complete imbalance going on. And it was, we're focused, our attention around. So if you imagine there's mental and physical and emotional and spiritual, if those are the 4 legs of the table, in the beginning, what I found with every single participant in my study and my own experiences as well, we're spending so much time on the mental and the physical. So really what that means is we're using our logical cognitive mind to take us around and do everything that we have to do. And we're really neglecting our emotional and spiritual selves. So imagine we're only using those 2 legs. There's this great imbalance. And with that, then a betrayal experience happens, and then there's that shock to the body and mind. There's the breakdown of the body, mind, and worldview, which is what I was just sharing with you, where now, although we were only working 2 of those legs, those 2 legs we can't even manage now, because now we're absolutely in shock. The bottom is dropped out, and that would be the second stage. The third one is your body and mind will do everything and anything to keep you safe. So what happens is, imagine if you were walking along the street and the bottom drops out, you would grab on to whatever you could so that you wouldn't drop down through that hole. So the third was survival. And here's where we become just almost, we have shut down any other aspect of ourselves that isn't going to help us survive. So here's where we're interested in how am I gonna live through this? How do I make this work? How do I pay for my bills? Whatever it is completely. It is survival only. That is the only thing on our minds. But again, once that stress response was ignited in phase 2, this survival response keeps it ignited, and we are having all kinds of physical, mental, and emotional symptoms here. So now not only are we stuck in this survival, now our bodies and minds are paying the price. So we stay here some decades, if not a lifetime, and with this proven plan to heal right now, we can actually move to stage 4, which would be it's really the acceptance of a new normal. The old normal no longer exists. It's not an option anymore. It's not available to us. And it's almost like here, if you've ever moved, you move into a new town, you're not comfortable, but you're like, I think I can make this work. I'll figure out my route to work. I'll figure out the best coffee shop and how to get there. And you sort of figure like, okay, this'll do. At this point, we start to slow down the stress response because we're starting to feel okay. We're really careful now about who we consider a friend, who we allow in, because our trust has been shattered. So we're really careful about calling someone a friend or not. If it's not reciprocal, here's the place where they're out. And we're very, very cautious and careful, but we're trying to rebuild our life. Once we feel safe and once we've adjusted to that new normal, it feels okay. We can sort of plant roots in that new place. Here's the most beautiful phase, Jean, and here's where there's this rebirth and healing and a rebuilding of our new life. But there's also another thing that happens, because remember I talked about that table in phase 1. Here's where now we are very balanced with all 4 legs, where there is, now we know our cognitive functions are working again. So yes, the mental, yes, the physical, we're still paying attention to that, but now we know we need to pay attention to our emotional selves, and our spiritual selves are so important at this point. So, and I'd love to share with you why the spiritual component comes in, but for the most part, those are the stages. And I just saw that consistently with every single participant in the study, and that had been my own experience. And the beauty of it is, You don't have to stay stuck in any stage. There are ways and proven tools to move from one to the next.
So you said you wanted to share some of that kind of spiritual aspect to that, why it's important. I would love to hear that.
Sure. What I found with everybody was whether they had, let's say, a religious upbringing or not, what happened was they may have started being pretty religious, and by the end of their experience, they moved towards the spiritual side of their religion, or they abandoned religion completely and went just for pure spirituality. And it was really for a few reasons. One was they desperately needed that connection. They needed to understand. They needed to make meaning from their experience. And that was huge. But the other thing was, and this was and it makes so much sense. And I know I did the same thing. When you can't yet trust yourself again, because let's say this was your best friend, or let's say this was a family member or your partner who you thought you knew so well. And then something like this can happen. You are blindsided. You never saw this coming at all. You don't trust yourself, because then you say, well, how do I not know something right in front of, see something right before my eyes? So you don't trust yourself. You don't trust, obviously, the person who betrayed you. So you kind of reason, well, at least I could trust the universe. And there was this beautiful, very fluid movement from either religion to spirituality, or just a movement towards spirituality, where it was to find that meaning, and we desperately needed to rebuild that trust. And until we can rebuild the trust in ourselves or in that person, we start with, let me trust the universe.
We casually use exaggerated language to describe our experience all the time. Mm-hmm. I was having dinner recently with a friend, and like, everybody at work hates me. And, as we continued the conversation, it wasn't really everyone. And as a practitioner, I'm constantly kind of parsing and pulling apart the vocabulary my clients are using to see what is the real issue and what are they emotionally responding to as they understand the issue. Mm-hmm. So betrayal is a word that I could see being tossed around in a very similar way. Oh, I feel so betrayed. Mm-hmm. How do you know when you're working with someone, or what did you see inside of this study to know that it was not just this hyperbolic description of a misunderstanding, like we talked about earlier in the conversation, mm-hmm. an actual real betrayal? How do you parse that out?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing is, it's really, if it doesn't ignite the stress response, if you don't feel that shock,
right?
It really is. It's a matter of degrees. But I'll tell you, originally, I wanted to study women who've been betrayed by a family member, partner, or friend. And when I was looking for participants, the truth is I could not find someone who had such a breakdown because of a friend. We get angry, we get upset, we may cut them off, we do all kinds of things. But it wasn't that level of crash and burn as with a family member or partner. But then again, that's the difference also between, let's say, resilience and post-traumatic growth or post-betrayal transformation. And I'd love to go down that road if you'd like.
Yeah, because I can hear the subtle difference that you're saying there, but I would really love for you to expand that out.
Sure. Resilience, that is a worthy goal. And I use this reference of a house, and it makes it so clear. So let's just say there's you need to get your roof repaired, and you repair your roof. That's resilience. You need a new paint job. You paint the house. That's resilience. You need a new boiler. You get a new boiler. That's resilience. With post-traumatic growth, which is, let's say, the rebuilding of a life after a complete destruction, and then I'll talk about post-betrayal transformation. What happens is, here's the difference. It's like a tornado goes by and levels your house, levels it. A new boiler isn't going to fix it. A new paint job isn't going to fix it. A new roof isn't going to fix it. And in fact, all three won't fix it. Here's where you have every right to say, look what happened. This is the most horrible, terrible, awful thing that's ever happened. And you're looking at the lot where your house once stood, and you'd absolutely be correct. You could pull everybody you know over to that lot where your house once stood and say, look at this. This is the most horrible, awful, terrible thing that's ever happened, and they would agree. Post-traumatic growth and post-betrayal transformation says, should you decide to rebuild that house, you don't have to do anything. But if you decide to rebuild that house, Why not make it better? Why not make it stronger? Why not make it bigger if that's what you like? Why not give it everything the old house didn't have? Why not make it beautiful? That's the difference. You're in a position because the old foundation, the old house is gone. It's not an option. And it takes that complete destruction. But in that destruction, you can build whatever you like.
And I guess I like that analogy. And I guess the distinction I heard when you were talking, where you said that you couldn't find folks that had felt like they'd truly been betrayed by friends, but you could find them from families and from partners.
I want to correct you. They absolutely were betrayed by friends, but it didn't destroy them to the level that a partner or family member betrayal did.
Gotcha. And I'm guessing that's just because of this issue of foundation. Mm-hmm. And, that these deep romantic partnerships we have become very foundational because of the way that we become intermeshed and intertwined. And obviously, family is something that is just, right in our DNA, literally, and entwined in who we are in our experience. And so I could see how when those sorts of rules, as you said earlier, get broken, that because it is such a deeper foundational thing, like any foundation, the more of the foundation we destroy, the deeper it is, the more damage it's going to cause throughout the entire structure.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the way it goes. Like, imagine here's this parent and child relationship, and then the parent does something horrible to the child. Well, that's a huge betrayal. I mean, but then there's also, let's say your coworker takes credit for your idea. That's a betrayal too, but
right.
They won't have the same magnitude or the same impact on us. Body and mind. Yeah.
And I'm also guessing that, just in those examples, like there is going to be for each individual relative sense of how destructive each of those betrayals are. Because if I am in a situation where a huge amount of my identity is wrapped up in the work that I do, and somebody takes credit for my work versus someone who wants to do a good job at work, but it's not their identity, even though on the surface, the betrayal looks identical, it's going to impact the first person more than the second person because of how foundational or the part of their foundation the betrayal is impacting.
Absolutely. And, I've really found that the ones that hurt the most are the ones that where we've had our greatest investment of trust and time and heart.
And I can also see inside of this process as you are, I would imagine, as you are helping your clients to rebuild trust, initially, they're probably working from a point of view, and you touched on this as you went through those stages, is that they're initially working from a point of view that I either trust or I don't. And it's this all or nothing proposition. And I have a feeling as you're working through this process and you're working with clients, what you're doing is you're showing them that trust is not all or nothing, that I can trust you some, and then as time passes, I can trust you more, which makes it safer versus I don't trust you and now I trust you.
You're right. And I look at it like this. It's almost, imagine a betrayal takes down a brick wall and the trust goes that way. But to rebuild the brick wall, you rebuild it brick by brick. And that's how trust is rebuilt. So each time where someone may have doubted your trust, or let's say you had a meeting at we were supposed to meet at 10 a.m. and you show up at 10 a.m. It's like that's a brick in the wall. And each one of those little seemingly insignificant actions help rebuild that wall.
And so as you are, as folks are working through this process and you're working with clients, are you spending, at the beginning, are you spending time where you are helping them to explicitly understand the rules that were in place and how they were violated and how that broke that trust? Like, is that an important part of the process?
Only if they don't understand it, but most often people are very clear what the rule was and what was broken. That's why they're hurt as they are.
So obviously we don't have time to just go into the entire tool set, but could you share a tool or two or an approach somewhere in the process that is kind of a snapshot of the way that you're doing this work to help folks move through this?
Sure. One of the most important things to do is it's called writing a coherent narrative. And this is really important because what you're doing is you're organizing your story mentally in order to create meaning from it, look at the gifts, believe it or not, that came of it. But in doing that, you're making it a part of your story and not the whole story. So what you're doing is making sense of it through this either written or unwritten process, so that you are able to make it that, let's say, chapter and not the whole book.
So could you give me like kind of a tangible example of what that might look like?
Yeah. So what, and this is something that I have a 6-week program. They all do it in the 6-week program. It's where I will have them just take some time and actually write down the beginning, middle, and end of their experience as if they were writing a story, and they are organizing their thoughts, the before, the during, the after, the all of it. And even just in that process, what's it led to? What do they now see so clearly? What are they now ready for? What are they ready to let go of? They're making so much sense of their experience and then meaning from their experience. Like they may have learned, hey, you know what? I never really took my boundaries very seriously, or I never really felt like I matter. And now I do. I realize that. I always felt unlovable. And now I realize, oh my gosh, I am so lovable. Whatever it is. But what that does is it puts a nice little bow on something that was just sort of foggy and all over the place.
And so when you say you're writing the narrative, it's before the betrayal, and where I am now post-betrayal.
And it's all of the things that you see and recognize now. Yeah, all of that.
And getting a chance to get that perspective. And I could see how just when we are forced to take the time and write something out, like when I do classes all the times, I tell people, I want you to take notes even if you don't want to take notes and even if it's not your disposition, because you hearing something and then you having to create tangible words out of it is a really different level of engagement.
Oh, absolutely.
And I can see that like, oh, I have a sense of this story. Like he betrayed me and this is how he betrayed me. Mm-hmm. But having to go beat by beat through it, the clarity that brings and understanding what happened. And I would be willing to bet as you're doing this, that you have folks who you've worked with who are recognizing resiliences and resources that they have created that they're not giving themselves credit for yet, because now they're having to name it. It's like, oh my gosh, look at where I am and how far I've come in this process.
Absolutely. And what happens is once forgiveness is a huge piece of this too. There are so many things, and each one of them gives us so much of our strength back and our confidence back. Because remember, when it comes to betrayal, here are all of those aspects of the self that have to be rebuilt. So when we're able to see what we've gained, what we've learned, what we now see so clearly, what we would never put up with now at this new space, we're regaining that confidence, rebuilding that self-esteem, all of those things that were hard hit.
And you used a word in there that I think oftentimes people emotionally misunderstand. I would love to hear what you mean. What do you mean when you say forgiveness in this context?
Forgiveness it's only a word until you have to do it or you choose to do it. And one of the greatest challenges I've found with forgiveness is it speaks a language the logical, rational mind doesn't understand. So in a betrayal experience, if you look at your experience, logically, that person did something so horrible and awful and unforgivable. But with forgiveness, it's the language of the soul, which says, and the heart, forgive anyway, if you choose to, because we realize forgiveness is really just getting our power back and letting go of the pain that we have given that person by holding on to it. And I've done so many, I've read so many papers and done papers myself on how forgiveness actually breaks the body down. So forgiveness is such a healing process for the body and the mind. But yeah, it makes no sense logically, and that's why it's so hard.
And what I hear what I think I hear in what you're saying is what I agree with is that when I'm forgiving you, I'm not saying what you did is okay. I'm not saying you can do it again. I'm not saying that you are free from responsibility. What I'm saying is I'm choosing to no longer be entangled in this thing and let it go and move on.
Oh, absolutely. That's it. Because then, if when we don't forgive, we're withholding forgiveness, we think that we're punishing someone and, for whatever, or somehow getting justice. First of all, that person may not even be aware or care.
Right.
But we're giving them so much power. So now they have the power of, we've been hurt by what they did, and now we're choosing to let them hurt us continuously because they're taking up way too much rent in our head.
And I think that's something that's really important to name explicitly, because I can see someone consciously or subconsciously resisting doing this type of work because intellectually they don't want to forgive the person who betrayed them. And if I have to say it's okay what happened, then I'm going to choose not to heal, because that is something that is too far to go. Mm-hmm. And so by having this clear understanding of what you mean explicitly by forgiveness, it makes it easier to step inside of that. Because when we've been hurt in that way, we don't want to say the other person is right, because they're not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They're not right, and never would they be right. But here's the thing too, they're also not awake. They're not awake and aware, because anybody who would consciously hurt us was sleepwalking. They just were. And if we grow and we see things that maybe we did that we wouldn't do now, and it's that same type of thing, but that it doesn't excuse it. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it something that we're saying it's okay to do to me. But what we're simply saying is, I have to let go of this pain, and forgiveness is the way to do it. And then if you choose to rebuild, you choose to let go, whatever, that's completely up to you.
So someone who is hearing this conversation and is just resonating with this idea of betrayal for the first time, and again, like you said earlier, we're getting some clarity where all of a sudden we can see what's going on. What are the tangible first practical steps you would advise someone who is now going, okay, this is something I really want to address and make transformation around?
Yeah, I actually have a quiz, because we've realized there's something called post-betrayal syndrome, which are these collection of symptoms that we're just walking around with. So I'm a big believer in, you can't change anything you're not aware of. And so often we just suppress or repress things because they're too painful to look at, but you can't heal it. And we think, well, we'll just, we just won't talk about it, or we won't acknowledge it. But what we resist persists. It's following us around. It's deciding so much about who we spend our time with, what we reach out and try to do. It's controlling us. So by acknowledging it, at least we then can take a look and say, okay, I can work towards healing this. And you have to, you got to feel it to heal it.
Yep. Awesome. Well, I will definitely include the link to the quiz in the show notes. So if folks want to take a look at it and try it out to see what it is, we'll make sure that they have access to that for sure.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah.
Awesome. Debi, thank you very much. I'm thrilled by your work. I love the fact that you've figured out a coherent way to talk about this and create transformation. And I really appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
So now that you've heard that conversation, you can understand why I was so excited about having this conversation. It's such a thoughtful, deliberate way to think about how betrayal happens, and more importantly, a thoughtful, deliberate way to understand the transformation that is happening, and the post-betrayal transformation that Debi talks about is possible. The quiz that she mentioned, you can access absolutely free of charge. All you need to do is go to tappingqandapodcast.com and click on the link for episode 319. Right above the player, you will see the link to that quiz. If you happen to be listening to this right now on the website, if you look above the quiz, it's right there. If you are listening to this on a mobile device or on a tablet, in the app that you're listening to the podcast on, if you go into the show notes, you will see I have a really clear link where you can click on and you can go access the quiz right away to figure out if some of the issues that you are struggling with right now are the consequence of betrayal. And if that's the case, you now have access to tools to start to transform that in a really specific way so you can be on the other side of that betrayal and be fully transformed. If you have any questions about the podcast, or if you have a suggestion for a topic or a guest in the future, I would love to hear those. Some of the best interviews we've ever done have come from suggestions from people just like you. If you click on the contact link on the website, or if you send an email directly to Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com, I get all of those emails. I would love to hear from you. If you're one of the very smart people who have downloaded the Tapping Q&A app, which is free for both Android and Apple devices, you'll see a contact link in there. You can click on the contact link. You can email me from inside of the app. You can even leave me a voice memo right inside of the app. I would love to hear from you how we can do things better moving forward, how we can do topics that you really want to hear from. And if you haven't done it yet, check out the archive. There is over 165 hours of free resources waiting for you. Tap along audios, interviews with some of the brightest mind in transformational work. We've covered almost every topic under the sun. If there's something that you want to tap for, go in there, search the archive, take advantage of those free resources. They're just waiting for you. And finally, if you know someone who would benefit from the conversation we had today, please be our ambassador and pass it along. Don't spam your inbox sending it to every single person in the world. But if there's someone you know who would benefit from this conversation, please pass it along. It would mean the world to me, and it would be awesome for Debi to continue to have her work reach the people who really need to hear from her. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Monterastelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Monterastelli, Tapping Q&A 2016. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Monterastelli or Tapping Q&A.